Tonight,
I may shut it down at some point, but I'd rather do tariffs.
Threatening economic consequences for Mexico. The president heads to the border a day after promising to close it down.
The latest from Capitol Hill.
Do you support LGBTQ equality? How do you reconcile your faith?
As Democrats push an equality act that could infringe on other freedoms.
And as the 2020 field widens, we put the Democrats' agenda under a microscope.
We are not seeing a fighting civil war, thank God.
Plus, the politics of division. We talked to a man who wrote the book on how decent people can save America from the culture of contempt.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The president getting an up-close and personal view of the crisis at the border. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder.
President Trump is in full speed mode on his border crusade, traveling to California today.
And the president toured a section of the wall while backing off threats to close down the border. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us from the North Lawn with tonight's top story. Ben?
Well, Jen and John, President Trump says he'll give Mexico a year to get its act together before taking action. Today, the Border Patrol showing the commander-in-chief firsthand the crisis pushing them to the breaking point.
We're building a lot of wall.
And the president got to see a portion of it up close today in the Golden State. This after he backed off the threat of an immediate border shutdown.
I may shut it down at some point, but I'd rather do tariffs.
That would be in the form of a 25% tariff on cars coming into the U.S. if Mexico doesn't stop illegal drugs and apprehend migrants.
The tariffs will work just like they've worked with steel. Our steel industry is so hot right now because of what I did with tariffs. Same thing with aluminum. They'll work. But if it didn't work, I will close the border.
But that won't happen if Mexico keeps up its latest efforts to change.
They're apprehending everybody. Yesterday, they apprehended 1,400 people. The day before, it was 1,000. And if they apprehend people at their southern border, where they don't have to walk through, that's a big home run.
He now wants Congress to play ball and get rid of chain migration, the visa lottery, along with catch and release.
Frankly, we should get rid of judges. You can't have a court case every time somebody steps their foot on our ground. So, very important that Congress acts.
Now, to put things into perspective, the Border Patrol apprehended an estimated 100,000 migrants in March alone. Now, that is the highest level in decades, which is why Trump said this cannot wait. We need to fix the system now. John, Jenna.
Thanks, Ben. Well, a busy day on Capitol Hill caps a busy week. Democratic and Republican lawmakers traded barbs in a contentious hearing over the Equality Act, and there's new hope for new parents.
Yeah, busy is a good word. Well, CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson has the latest from Congress and what is coming down the pike. Abigail?
Well, yes, we have the Equality Act, which saw its first hearing this week. And this is a bill that aims to make discrimination against LGBTQ people illegal. But lawmakers, the co-sponsors of this bill, say that they want to protect these people from situations like being evicted from an apartment or fired because of their sexual orientation. But the bill does much more than that. And it calls for not just sexual orientation to be added as a protected class in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but also gender identity. So people, for instance, who are born male but identify as female can then be protected under this as well. And religious freedom advocates have a lot of issues with this bill and the threat they say it poses to religious liberty around the country. But the gender identity clause in particular also has some LGBTQ individuals sounding the alarm on this. Take a look.
Let me tell you what happens if H.R. 5 passes. Male rapists will go to women's prisons and will likely assault female inmates, as has already happened in the UK. Female survivors of rape will be unable to contest male presence in women's shelters. Men will dominate women's sports. Girls who would have taken first place will be denied scholastic opportunity. Women who use male pronouns to talk about men may be arrested, fined, and banned from social media platforms. Girls will stay home from school when they have their periods to avoid harassment by boys in mixed-sex toilets. Girls and women will no longer have a right to ask for female medical staff or intimate care providers, including elderly or disabled women who are at serious risk of sexual abuse. Female security officers will no longer have the right to refuse to perform pat-down or intimate searches of males who say they're female. And women undergoing security checks will no longer have the right to refuse having those searches performed by men claiming a feminine identity. Everything I just listed is already happening. And it's only going to get worse if gender identity is recognized in federal law.
Now, Julia added that as a member of the LGBTQ community, she supports the general goal of this bill, but said she believes treating someone as if they are a member of the opposite sex is not a civil right. And that issue of men who identify as female participating in women's sports was really a central focus of the hearing this week.
Yeah, Abby, and this Equality Act, of course, setting off sparks on both sides of the aisle. This is really a big issue for Democrats.
Yeah, that's true. And Democrats, this week, it is something, they named it H.R. 5 because Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that is how important she thinks this bill is, and she wants to see it get it done. It likely will pass the House very quickly, but I don't expect it will see a vote in the Senate this session.
In favor of this bill, what did he have to say?
Well, that's right. Reverend Dennis Wiley, who knew Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement, was actually there, and he was testifying supporting this bill and said that he believes the church needs to step up and support this issue. Take a look.
Why, as one who's dedicated himself to religious life your entire life, do you support LGBTQ equality? How do you reconcile your faith, your belief, with those who oppose it for religious reasons?
I grew up believing that it was part of my responsibility as a minister, not just to stand in the pulpit and preach on Sunday mornings, but also to be active in the community and in the nation and the world in an active way to challenge any kind of issue that would bring any kind of injustice to people. So I am sometimes amazed at how the church is not more active in struggles like this.
Now, right now, about 50% of states already have laws similar to this in place, but groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom are really sounding the alarm on if this becomes a federal law, saying that they believe this is a frontal assault on religious liberty, and that if this does become a federal law, we will see cases of things like faith-based adoption and foster care agencies required to place children with same-sex couples, and florists forced to fill orders for same-sex weddings all over the country. Right now, they're defending a lot of those cases in states, but they believe that they will pop up all over the country if this becomes a federal law.
That's right. Legislation debate that we'll keep on top of. Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson. Thanks, Abby.
Well, former Vice President Joe Biden is trying to laugh off the controversy that's circling his potential 2020 campaign. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
You guys brung me to the dance, and you really did. And I just want you to know I had permission to hug Lonnie. We had permission. By the way, he gave me permission to touch him. Everyone knows I like kids better than people.
But people might be the former president's problem after several women have made accusations complaining they were uncomfortable with some of his physical gestures. Today, Biden said he, quote, wouldn't be surprised if more women came forward.
Well, here now with more is Hannah Trudeau, national politics reporter at the National Journal. Thank you for being with us, Hannah.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Hannah, you were following the 2020 Democrats very closely. What do you think? Did Joe Biden do himself any favors with these latest comments?
I think we're seeing Joe Biden be Joe Biden right now. He's used to sort of ad-libbing his speeches a little bit, especially to a friendlier, familiar audience. And so I think we're seeing a lot of what he's been doing in the past, certainly when he was vice president and helping out Obama on the trail, but also in his two previous failed presidential campaigns from the last couple times that he ran. So I don't know if he necessarily did himself any favors by making light of it, but he's certainly staying true to his form.
Hannah, he has yet to declare whether or not he will run for president, but if he does, do you think his campaign can survive this quote-unquote scandal of inappropriate touching?
I think he's going to be inundated with questions as soon as he does announce, if he does announce. I think, you know, there's no shortage of questions to be answered from women who have started expressing concern about the way that he had made them feel in the past. But also, you know, the media is going to start looking into. He has a long track record to be sort of dug into, and I think that he's prepared to do that. His team certainly indicates that they're, you know, moving forward as planned. But I think, yeah, I think he'll have to answer questions right out of the gate.
Yeah. What about President Trump? We, of course, saw that video that he put out mocking Joe Biden. Hannah, do you think President Trump is maybe a little bit threatened at the thought of a potential Biden candidacy? I
think Trump really wants to go up against Biden, and I think he might be threatened by him, and for good reason, because the whole argument based on Biden's potential candidacy is that he could win back some of those voters that went maybe twice for Obama and once for Trump last time, a lot of the working class white voters in the Midwest, blue collar voters. And so I think he wants to take him on. I think he has fun poking fun at him. But I think he's a little scared of him, too.
Who do you think, speaking of Trump wanting to take on, who do you think in the pool of Democrats is perhaps the greatest threat or the greatest challenge to take on President Trump?
Well, you know, there's been preliminary polling done on this, and certainly Biden is you know, a challenge to Trump, and also Bernie Sanders is a potential challenge to him. And he, just the other day, we saw him sort of make a play for some of those Fox News viewers that Trump appeals to, and he sort of said he's doing a Fox News debate coming up on Tax Day, and he said, you know, there's a difference between Fox News, the station, and Fox News viewers. So that was kind of a subtle way of saying, you know, to the Trump voters, hey, I see you, and I'm making a play for you.
Yeah. What about Beto O'Rourke? You know, he had this big rollout, has done pretty well with fundraising, but it doesn't seem like, Hannah, he's getting quite as much attention as he once was. Do you think do you think his star is fading a little bit?
I think Beto, there's a lot of question marks around Beto and his candidacy and his campaign apparatus and what he's sort of doing for whether he's playing the long haul, the short haul. He's currently driving himself around the country. He's going back to Iowa, where he did receive a big reception there. But there's a lot of questions about what his sort of strategy is. He nabbed one of the top Obama deputy campaign managers for Obama's campaign in 2012. So that was seen as a real get in terms of making a structural change and moving in a direction of a real presidential campaign. But he's still kind of ad-libbing too on the road, and yeah, I think it remains to be seen how he's going to play long term.
Yeah. Hannah Trudeau, National Journal, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, how the descendants of two figures on opposing sides of history are coming together by walking the slave trail. Next. An unlikely relationship is helping Virginia move toward reconciling racial division. The descendants of two key players in the history of slavery in America are working together to heal wounds.
CBN senior correspondent Eric Phillips reports from Richmond, the former capital of the Confederacy.
If you're not feeling the souls of the departed here, something's wrong with you.
It's a moment of reality and acknowledgement, and a sacred time, actually, to just realize what our ancestors went through so that we actually are still here today.
On this day, a coalition from across Virginia walks a part of the Richmond Slave Trail. One stop, the historic Lumpkins jail site, where hundreds of thousands of slaves were bought and sold. Virginians for Reconciliation started last year to confront racism. One founder, former Governor Bob McDonnell, says moving forward is impossible without acknowledging the wrongs of the past.
Because this story that has to be told about what happened within 300 yards of the state capitol, the governor's mansion, people are being bought and sold, families being ripped apart. We have to understand, what does that still mean today?
Among the group, out-of-town guests with a special history. Lynn Jackson is a descendant of Dred Scott, a slave who notably sued the government for his freedom. In 1857, the case wound up in the Supreme Court, with then Chief Justice Roger Brooke Taney playing a lead role in striking it down. Standing next to Jackson on this day, one of Taney's descendants.
Roger Brooke Taney made a decision that blacks were inferior to whites and had no standing as a citizen, could not be citizens, and therefore he had no standing to sue for his freedom.
The two now work together, spreading the message of education and reconciliation.
The person causing the harm has to recognize they did it. They have to go to the injured party and recognize to them that they hurt them, and they have to express regret. And then the injured party has to forgive you for that. And when we did that, the Scotts embraced us and forgave us.
If they can do it, we should all take encouragement and be able to do it.
Because for Dred Scott and Taney to be working together is something most people would think would never happen.
That's why the two felt it was important to be here on this day together. Former Governor Bob McDonnell says later on this year, ground will be broken right here on this site with money that was appropriated during his administration to tell the story of slave trading here in Virginia and what those men and women had to endure. The timing is important as the country remembers 400 years since the first slaves were brought to America.
It started here in Virginia in that sense, and we would like it to come full circle and possibly end here.
In Richmond, Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Arthur Brooks is the author of Love Your Enemies, How Decent People Can Save America from the Culture of Contempt. Arthur, thank you for being with us today.
Great to be with you.
First question for you. Can you explain what is the culture of contempt, and how can Americans overcome this deep-seated disgust for one another?
Well, we all know that there's a lot of discomfort in our country because of the way that we talk to each other politically. Most people have strong views. I do, you do, and everybody watching us does, but we don't like what our country has become. 1 in 6 Americans have stopped talking to a family member over the past 2 years because of politics, and 93% of us say we hate how divided we've become. What's the problem? It's actually not anger. It's not disagreement either. I mean, anger is a hot emotion that says I care. The problem is contempt, eye-rolling, sarcasm, where we treat each other as utterly worthless. That's made us unpersuasive, it's locked us down, it's made it impossible for us to really communicate, and it makes permanent enemies, and here's the worst part, it lowers our happiness. And that's the biggest thing that we see with frustration, anxiety, and depression, and loneliness on the rise, in no small part because of the way we treat each other.
In your book, you cite Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address where he called on Americans to come together and be touched by, quote, the better angels of our nature. What did you mean? Why did you include that?
Well, Abraham Lincoln was, of course, a visionary, and he gave those words in his first inaugural. It was not successful. That went on. He went on to, of course, see the Civil War. Right. Afterward, the Gettysburg Address came back to it and said, maybe we can live up to these ideals at this point, effectively, was what he was saying. And what he meant was that just because people disagree with each other does not mean that the other has to be the embodiment of that disagreement. Just because somebody has a differing view than me doesn't mean that that person is stupid and evil. The truth is we are being manipulated in this country by an outrage industrial complex, a small minority in media and in politics on campuses that are saying that somebody who disagrees with you is an evil person and must be banished. That makes progress impossible. It's making us less persuasive with each other. It makes it harder for us to convince people. And, you know, I believe that we need to convince each other to bring our country up, and it's making us unhappy as a country, and we need to fight back against that as individuals.
How do you propose that we fight back against it?
We need a revolution of the heart. You know, I could say we need better politicians or we need better media, but the truth of the matter is that each one of us will be treated with contempt around the Thanksgiving table or on social media, any place practically. When that happens, when each person watching us is treated with contempt, that's an opportunity to answer with love. You know, Matthew 5:44 reminds us to love our enemies. Dr. Martin Luther King, he gave a great sermon about Matthew 5:44 when he said Jesus didn't say like your enemies. Right. He said love your enemies, because that's a hard thing, that's a subversive thing, and in so doing, that changes my heart. It brings me happiness. It makes me more persuasive. And so it's an act of will, because faith is an act of will. When somebody treats me with contempt in this culture of bitterness, if I answer with love, I don't have to agree, I shouldn't agree, But if I answer, even in disagreement, with love, suddenly something starts to change, and I became an agent of the values that I hold most dear.
Going back to that inaugural address, it was given before the attack on Fort Sumter in the beginning of the Civil War. We're not seeing levels of division like we had back then, are we?
We are not seeing a fighting civil war, thank God. But the levels of polarization in America, according to political scientists, are as high now for the first time as they were in the 1850s. In other words, we're not going to shoot each other. I think the institutions are very strong, but we're as bitterly polarized. And what that means is that we can't come together. Now, that's bad. That's bad not just because it makes us unhappy, but because America is a gift to the world. This country needs to be strong. Look, democratic capitalism from our culture has lifted 2 billion of our brothers and sisters out of poverty since I was a child over the past half century. If we become weak and we become divided, we will suffer. Our happiness will fall, and that's a pity. But people around the world could die. I mean, that is not our mission as a great country. We must come together.
Arthur Brooks, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When we come back, the story of how the best of enemies became the best of friends, now playing on the big screen.
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
Welcome back. Durham, North Carolina still wasn't ready in 1971 to rock the boat and integrate public schools. Then a crisis at a black neighborhood school forced the issue, sending the city into a bitter standoff. But that's not where the story ends.
Because miracles happen when opposing sides find common ground. A new film inspired by those true events hits theaters today. Caitlin Burke brings us a look at the best of enemies.
Where are we gonna go to school now? I'm gonna find you somewhere real nice to go.
The council will vote to either adopt or reject school integration.
Folks in this town like things the way they are.
We gonna beat school segregation once and for all.
The Best of Enemies tells the story of bitter rivals Ann Atwater, a civil rights activist, and KKK leader C.P. Ellis. A crisis forces them to start talking.
Straight up, Ellis. He acted like he was the meanest man in the world, and I wanted to cut his head off.
She can upset the world with her mouth if she wants to.
Director Robin Bizzle's desire to bring this true story to the big screen began more than a decade ago.
Time magazine, 2005, there was a little blurb in the milestones page that said C.P. Ellis had died and he was a Klan leader who became a union activist. And I wanted to know how that happened, because Klan leaders don't just change.
Bill Riddick watched it all unfold as he was brought in to solve Durham's escalating crisis with a charrette.
You've got to define a charrette for me.
The charrette is a planning process where folks with different opinions about the same problem come together, and over a period of time, they hopefully will work out those differences to come to a solution that would make the situation for each of them better.
All the better is you don't get in my way.
Well, I'm gonna get in your way.
We're here trying to understand each other for once and stop fighting.
If you're really a Christian, right, and you really say you love God and you love the way God loves, then love is a search for understanding, isn't it? So even if you're the person that you want to hate the most, you got to rise above it at some point if you want change to happen.
So you had a challenge in this film, many I'm sure, but you had to make a Klan member likable. How do you do that?
You know, for me, it was all about CP and finding out kind of where hatred came from, where his hatred came from, right? So I wanted to know that. So I had to focus somewhat on him and his life to find that out. And in talking to Ann over the years about CP, she had great insight for me on how she was able to navigate into CP's heart and change it.
That gun don't belong here.
I like to have it close in case I need to do my talking for me.
This here does the talking for me.
I have a Bible.
Oh, you do? Have you read it?
Of course I read it. And we go to church on Sundays.
Well, then you ought to know, CP.
Know what?
Same God made you, made me.
He didn't belong in that group.
He did not. He did not.
He didn't belong in that group. He just didn't know it. He needed Ann to tell him.
We began to talk about what was on our heart, and both of us will.
We knew if we didn't speak up for our children, that nobody else would.
I'm supposed to hate black folks. Now, if I don't believe that, then I got a problem.
The friendship between Ann and CP brought healing to a divided community. A timely message even still.
With the increase of rhetoric, hateful rhetoric, white supremacist rhetoric, violence, you know, I turn to a story like this and maybe it gives me some hope for the future.
Caitlin Burke, CBN News, New York.
Rated PG-13.
That looks so good.
Yeah, I think it's one that I'm going to have to put on my list to go watch.
Yeah, and a great message.
Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.